Okay, we're going to get right into it. God, take away everything I think I know about this book, about this process, and about you, God, so that I can have an experience with you. So we are going to go to there's a solution, and at the top of the page you're going to write this. If I never used, I'd never experience the physical part of my disease. If I never used, I'd never experience the physical part of my disease. If I never used, I'd never experience the physical part of my disease. This is the first half of the first step, the admission of powerlessness over drugs and alcohol physically after taking the first drink or drug. This is the first half of the first step, the admission of powerlessness over drugs and alcohol physically after taking the first drink or drug. This is the first half of the first step, the admission of powerlessness over drugs and alcohol physically after taking the first drink or drug. So, part of the Bill story exercise was obviously to be able to admit and find the physical allergy within us, if we admit that we're alcoholics or if we admit we're addicts. And that's basically the first half of the first step, right? So, in admitting that, we basically admit that we can never pick up or use a drink or a drug again. That's just the bottom line of it. And that's what this is saying. If I never picked up a drink or a drug, then I would never know that I had the physical allergy, because the physical allergy is only triggered when I pick up. Okay? So it says chapter 2, there is a solution, and it says hopeless equals wanting to stop but can't. So, in your Bill story exercise, were you able to acknowledge hopelessness? Were you able to acknowledge that there were times where you wanted to stop but couldn't, or there were times where you wanted to manage but couldn't? It says, we of Alcoholics Anonymous know thousands of men and women who were just as hopeless as Bill. And we're going to underline hopeless. And again, the first time that we talked about hopelessness in Bill Wilson was in the doctor's opinion, when we were talking about the most time that Bill could ever have on his own was 90 days, which alluded to two different things. One was that it is pretty hopeless. You can only put together 90 days on your own, but also for the newcomers that want to hold on to that 90 days or the 6 months or the year that they were able to put together on their own as a justification for being able to control the drug and alcohol use, it doesn't mean that they're not hopeless. So here it's talking about wanting to stop but can't. So Bill wanted to stop but couldn't, or he wanted to manage but he could not. Nearly all who have recovered. We're going to underline the word recovered. Again, the difference between recovered and recovering. So this book carries hope that there is a time where we do recover, right? Yes, we are always in the process of evolving and getting better if we are on a certain path, but we do recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. It says they have solved the drink problem. Now next to that, I want you to write, can I solve my problem on my own? And ask yourself, can you solve your problem on your own? Is that your experience? Have you been able to consistently solve your problems on your own? It says we are average Americans. All sections of this country and many of its occupations are represented, as well as many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. We are people who would normally not mix. Look around you in the meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous. Would you typically hang out with most of the people that you do, right? So this program brings us together, all kinds of different people. And the reason why is because alcoholism and addiction, it does not discriminate. It doesn't care what color you are, what sexual preference you are, what gender you are, what race you are, what socioeconomic background you are, what country you're from. None of it matters. If you're an alcoholic, you're an alcoholic. It says, but there exists among us a fellowship, a friendliness, and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. We are like the passengers of a great liner the moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joyousness, and democracy pervade the vessel from steerage to captain's table. Pervade means to spread through. Now, This reference that they're talking about is basically a metaphor of the experience of the Titanic, right? Because this book was published in 1939 and the Titanic happened in 1912, so it was pretty fresh on everyone's mind. So I'm going to kind of give you an example, and for the people who are a little bit younger than, Titanic age people, I'm going to reference the movie and make it more exciting. So, let's imagine that Leonardo DiCaprio and Billy Zane are on the ship. Now, the steerage is where the poorest of the poor people stayed in the ship, and usually it was a little bit underwater, right? And that's where Leo would stay. And Billy Zane would have stayed at the captain's table. The captain's table is basically where the richest of the rich people were invited to eat in the dining hall, right? So, the Titanic is sinking, right? The quartet has played their last song. The ship's splitting in half. It's a big mess. Rose is out of the picture because she sucks because she didn't fucking let Jack hang out on her piece of broken wood. But Jack and Billy, they're hanging out, or Leo and Billy, they're hanging out. They're running to the rails, and they're looking at each other. And in that moment of this ship is sinking, none of it matters. Like, nothing about where they're from, their socioeconomic background, all that stuff like that. It's all out the window. Basically, in that moment, and it's like, how are we going to survive right now? Right? So they both jump into the water together. They both swim to a piece of wood together. They both help each other up onto the piece of the wood, and there's camaraderie. There's real sort of, we need to get through this together type of feelings going on, right? Days go by. They are floating out in the middle of the ocean. Somehow they survive. They get onto this island, and it's a miracle. They look at each other. They give each other a hug. They shake each other's hand, and they go about their merry way, right? But prior to the, knowing that they're going to survive part, and when they're in that common peril, they are, tight. They're like best friends. They're helping each other like nobody's business. So it says, unlike the feelings of the ship's passengers, however, our joy and escape from disaster does not subside as we go our individual ways. The feeling of having shared in the common peril is one element in the powerful cement which binds us. So that common peril is what brings us together, right? It says, but that in itself would never have held us together as we are now joined. And we're going to underline that. And next side, you're going to write warning. So a lot of times when people are in treatment centers, the staff usually gets on the clients about talking about war stories, right? And the reason why is because war stories can bring us together, okay? War stories are entertaining. War stories are what we relate on, but they're not going to keep us together, okay? We can share war stories for a month or 6 months in a treatment center and not go any further than that, and then leave the treatment center and relapse, So it's a real warning. We need to be able to move past that. So what do? What's past that? And what we're going to do is we're going to read this. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. We have a way out in which we can absolutely agree and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. This is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. And we're going to underline and highlight all this. And next to that, I want you to write cement ingredients. So basically, they've talked about 3 different ingredients that keep us together as alcoholics or addicts. 1 is the common peril. That's not enough, though. 2 is a common solution. What's the common solution? Well, we need to develop a relationship with a power greater than ourselves. Okay? That needs to be there. And 3rd is brotherly or sisterly and harmonious action, which means us coming together, us being of service to each other, us being loving and kind to each other. So we need to have all 3 of those things happening. The common peril brings us together, but what keeps us together is the common peril plus the program of action plus the relationship with a power greater than ourselves. Okay? And those are the cement ingredients. So we wrote cement ingredients in here. Make sense? Cool. Moving on. It says, an illness of this sort, and we have come to believe that an illness involved those about us in a way no other human sickness can. If a person has cancer, all are sorry for him, and no one is angry or hurt. Now, that's probably not true. I know plenty of people who got upset with people who had cancer because the person who had cancer either didn't want to go to treatment or waited to tell people or blah, 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 blah. Again, it's just one of those things the book says it's not necessarily true. But it says, but not so with the alcoholic illness, for with it there goes annihilation of all things worthwhile in life. So it says it engulfs all whose lives touch the sufferers. It brings misunderstanding, fierce resentment, financial insecurity, disgusted friends and employers, warped lives of blameless children, sad wives, parents, anyone can increase the list. And we're going to underline, it engulfs all whose lives touch the sufferers. It brings misunderstanding, fierce resentment, financial insecurity, disgusted friends and employers, warped lives of blameless children, sad wives, parents, anyone can increase the list. Now next to that, we're going to write unmanageability description of disease untreated. Unmanageability description of disease untreated. Unmanageability description of disease untreated. Now, interestingly enough, we're not writing this is the description of what we're like when we're getting high or when we're drunk. What we're writing is unmanageability description of disease untreated. And what this means is that all these things that they're talking about here, misunderstanding, fierce resentment, financial insecurity, disgusted friends and employers, warped lives of blameless children, sad wives and parents, all that stuff can happen sober if we are not treating our disease. And I can attest that I have participated and experienced all these things sober, every single one of them. Ask yourself if you have. So it's really important for me to treat my disease and basically treat my spiritual malady through the constant thought of others and how I may help their needs in order to not experience these things. It says, we hope this volume will inform and comfort those who are or who may be affected. There are many. Highly competent psychiatrists who have dealt with us have found it sometimes impossible to persuade an alcoholic to discuss the situation without reserve. Why? Because we typically don't trust doctors, or they don't understand us, or we're just med-seeking and trying to get some sort of prescription for them, right? It says, strangely enough, wives, parents, and intimate friends usually find us even more unapproachable than do the psychiatrist and the doctor, because wives, parents, and friends usually feel like they're nagging us, right? And we don't want to open up to them. We're usually doing behaviors that we don't want them to know about because we feel ashamed, and so we have all that going on, right? It says, but the ex-problem drinker who has found the solution, who is properly armed with facts about himself. So here I am, an ex-problem drinker, and I found a solution, right? I'm properly armed with facts about myself. And this is part of the reason why we're doing the Bill Story exercise, right? Because the Bill Story exercise gives us facts about ourselves. We can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. So that's how important it is to have done that exercise and participated in that, so that you really have a full knowledge of your condition, because that is the ammunition or the key to being able to reach into the hearts of other alcoholics and addicts and really help other people. It says that the man who is making the approach has had the same difficulty, that he obviously knows what he is talking about, that his whole deportment means behavior or attitude, shouts at the new prospect that he is a man with a real answer. So, the answer that I have and the answer that I'm providing to the people that I work with is the answer in the book. Now, I know it's a real answer because it worked for 100 people, right? And it's worked for thousands of people, and it's continued to work, and the book continues to sell because it's continuing to work. These are all things that we've gone over already in reading this book. It says that he has no attitude of holier than thou. So never treat people like you're better than them or talking down on them. It says nothing whatever except the sincere desire to be helpful. So we have no expectations on how they need to behave or act. All we're trying to do is help all the time. There are no fees to pay, no axes to grind, no people to please, no lectures to be endured. So really, when I work with people, I don't have any expectation whatsoever on what they do, how they treat me, how they treat themselves, whether or not they do this work, any of that stuff. My job is to just do my best to show up for as many people as I possibly can and take them through the work, and that's it. I don't fire any sponsees. I don't give sponsees ultimatums. I don't treat sponsees like less than me. I don't do any of that stuff. We're all human beings. We're all trying to find a way to connect to something greater than ourselves so that we can feel comfortable in our own skin. That is my main purpose, and that is it. So again, it's that stuff that we talked about earlier. This process is not to make me depend on a sponsor, but to enable me to become dependent upon God. Right? So my job is not to make my sponsee dependent upon me in some weird authoritative relationship, but more to depend on and find a relationship with something bigger than me, right? Okay, so it says, these are the conditions we have found most effective. After such an approach, many take up their beds and walk again. And we're going to underline, many take up their beds and walk again. And next to that, we're going to write promise. So what it's saying is that if we approach people and work with people as they just outlined here, then it's possible that they are going to get better, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to put a bracket around these two paragraphs, and we're going to write sponsorship, because those are some guidelines for how to work with other people, okay? It says, none of us make a sole vocation. Vocation means job of this work, nor do we think its effectiveness would be increased if we did. Now why? Why would making a job of this work not be effective? Well, it says there's no fees to pay, right? So that means that this job is a job that I would be doing for free. Now, if I made like my life just about doing this, and I wasn't getting paid, then very soon I would find myself homeless. Very soon I'd find myself starving. And very soon I'd find myself in a position where anyone who would look at me would not want what I have, right? So I can't make this my sole vocation. I need to have a job. I need to have a career. I need to be a productive member of society in order to attract people to work with me, because my life depends on me working with other people. It says, we feel that the elimination of our drinking is but a beginning. A much more important demonstration of our principles lies before us in our respective homes, occupations, and affairs. And we're going to underline all that, okay? So quitting drinking and quitting drugs is just the beginning. The most important thing is basically what we do out in the world, right? So that goes even to, in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, right? Being the poster child of AA or NA and going to a bunch of meetings and being secretary and speaking all over the place and blah, 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 but treating your spouse like shit, or treating your employees or employer like crap, or, whatever. That's not what AA was about. AA is about bringing this new person into all your affairs, right? All of us spend much of our spare time in this sort of effort, which we are going to describe. So this effort they're talking about, right, is working with others, and this is why I spend as much time as I possibly can working with as many people as I can, because what happens is that it trains me to be more selfless, right? And the more people that I work with, the more I take that attitude into the rest of my affairs. The kinder I am to the people I work with, the kinder I am in my relationship, the kinder I am to the people that I come in contact in the day, So basically, it's just removing selfishness through selfless actions, right? It says a few of us are fortunate enough to be so situated that they can give nearly all of their time to the work. And we're going to circle fortunate, and we're going to underline all of this basically. And next to fortunate, you're going to write blessing. Now the people they're talking about there are the people who have trust funds, the people who win the lottery, the people who are retired, the people who can dedicate all their time to doing work with other people and not needing to make money, and will still survive and be okay, right? That is a blessing to be able to do that, to dedicate all your time to the work. Think about how connected that you can get if that's all you're doing with your life, right? It says, if we keep on the way we are going, there's little doubt that much good will result. But the surface of the problem would hardly be scratched. Those of us who live in large cities are overcome by the reflection that close by hundreds are dropping off into oblivion each day. Many could recover if they had the opportunity we have enjoyed. How then shall we present that which has been so which has been so freely given to us. And we're going to underline, how then shall we present that which has been so freely given to us? So basically they're saying there's a lot of people out there who are suffering. So the question that they're posing is how do we help them? Now, the answer is very clear. It says, we have concluded to publish an anonymous volume setting forth the problem as we see it. We shall bring to task our combined experience and knowledge. This should suggest a useful program for anyone concerned with a drinking problem. So, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12 steps, everything, the program of recovery is in this book. This is the purest, most original form of the program, right? So if you want to understand what the 12 steps are really about and what the program is really about and how the program is intended to work, you should go to the source, right? And the source is here. We're doing it right now. That's why I'm taking the time to do this, because I feel like it's important to sort of dispel all the ideas of what the 12 steps are about and just go right to where they were written originally. So it then says, of necessity, there will have to be a discussion of matters medical, psychiatric, social, and religious. We are aware that these matters are, from their very nature, controversial. So we're going to underline all that. Why do you think that we need to talk about that stuff? Well, because sobriety, because recovery, because addiction, and alcoholism, and it affects every area of our life, right? It affects the medical area, the psychiatric, the social, religious, everything, right? So all those things are going to be touched on because sobriety is not just about not drinking. Recovery is not just about not using or, acting out in addictive behaviors. It's really about a new way of life, right? So it says, nothing would please us so much as to write a book which would contain no basis for contention or argument. So we don't want to be contentious. We don't want to create controversy. Most of us sense that real tolerance, and we're going to underline the word tolerance. And next to that, I want you to write accepting people for how they are. So tolerance is accepting people for how they are, accepting situations for how it is, right? And think about what gets in the way of you accepting people for how you are. Is it comparison? Is it your pride? Is it your fear? Is it your judgment? Feeling less than or greater than, These are the things that we want to work on. And this is why working with others is so beneficial, because if you work with a lot of people, you're eventually going to work with a personality that typically you would judge, right? Or typically you would feel better than, or typically you'd feel less than. And through having this book in between you and another human being, and you're dedicating your time to selflessly be of service to them, it basically breaks down all those walls that you would build typically that would create intolerance, right? So that's why this process is really helpful. It says, most of us sense that real tolerance of other people's shortcomings and viewpoints and a respect for their opinions are attitudes which make us more useful to others. So, again, having respect for other people's viewpoints, for other people's opinions, for their attitudes, for, understanding and accepting people's shortcomings, that's what makes us more useful, right? So, yeah, I'm not even going to get into what Facebook looks like these days, or politics or all that stuff. I mean, really, it's just about being useful and being kind and loving. Let people be what they are. It's all good. It says, our very lives, and this is the urgency here, our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend upon our constant thought of others and how we may help their needs. I'm going to read that shit again. Our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend upon our constant thought of others and how we may help their needs. We're going to underline and highlight that. Our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend upon our constant thought of others and how we may help their needs. So, why? Why does my life depend on my constant thought of others and how I may help their needs? Well, if I'm not thinking about others, what am I thinking about? I'm thinking about myself. Now, when I'm thinking about myself, typically it may be good sometimes, but sometimes it's not so great, right? Sometimes I feel like shit about myself. Sometimes I start slipping into fear. Sometimes I start thinking that, I'm not going to be lovable, or I'm not going to make enough money, or I'm not going to find enough right relationship, or I'm not going to be able to show up for the relationship that I'm in right, or whatever. I mean, these are just all thoughts that could go on in my head. I could feel guilty about stuff that I've done in the past, or, regret stuff or whatever. So that's the kind of stuff that I like to slip into when I'm thinking about me, right? So basically, what's missing in all that is my relationship with a power greater than myself that loves me, wants the best for me, and that is taking care of me no matter what, right? Because if I have that going on in my life, then the fear is gone, the regret is gone, the judgment on myself and others is gone, because everything is a part of that universe and everything is perfect as it is presented to me in each moment, right? So, in order to connect to that, in order to feel that presence in my life, I need to think of others and how I may help their needs. That's the path to that, right? And that's not just AA spiritual practice or NA spiritual practice. That's, true Christian practice. That's Jewish practice. That's, Hindu practice. It's Muslim practice. It's the basis of all spirituality around the world. I know I left out some things, but, basically, all spiritual practice is, created out of loving one another and being kind to another, right? So, if I don't do that stuff, then I fall prey to the fear, right? And if I sit in the fear eventually long enough, as an addict or an alcoholic, I typically want to numb out that pain, right? And for me, that leaves two options. One is to either get drunk or high, or two is to kill myself. Those are my, numbing choices. So in order to avoid being in those situations, I need to constantly think of others and how I may help their needs. So that is my purpose in life, okay? It says, you may already have asked yourself why it is that all of us became so very ill from drinking. Doubtless you are curious to discover how and why, in the face of expert opinion to the contrary, we have recovered from a hopeless condition of mind and body. And you're going to underline, doubtless you are curious to discover how and why, in the face of expert opinion to the contrary, we have recovered from a hopeless condition of mind and body. Now, it doesn't seem so hopeless today because there's people all over the world that are sober today. There's treatment centers all over the world today. There's sober livings all over the world today. There's Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and all kinds of different 12-step programs all over the world today with people who have recovered. Okay? But when this book was written, people were not recovering. People were very in touch with the hopelessness. There wasn't that vast knowledge and example of recovered experience out in the world. So when they wrote this, they really were saying, yeah, it's a miracle. You're probably wondering how this is even possible. It says, if you are an alcoholic who wants to get over it, you may already be asking, what do I have to do? It says, it is the purpose of this book to answer such questions specifically. And we're going to underline specifically. So in this book, they're going to describe exactly what you need to do to recover, which makes me wonder, why was it that it took me 10 years of sobriety to find somebody to take me through the book? I mean, that's insane. If this book is going to show me exactly what I need to do to recover from alcoholism and drug addiction, I feel like everybody should be doing it, right? In the margin, you're going to write this: always check and be specific. Don't assume any time. And that is in reference to specifically. So this is the life lesson here, right? So look at your relationship. How many times do things in your relationship get messed up because you weren't specific? You didn't check in to see what was going on with your partner. You made assumptions. You wrote stories in your head. What about your relationships with people in the rooms, or in the workplace, or any relationship? Most relationships get messed up because the communication is not there. The communication is typically not there because people aren't checking and being specific, right? If I, run into a friend of mine and they seem standoffish, right? Like this happened the other day. I was at a meeting. I saw my friend. She seemed a little off to me. And instead of like sitting there writing a story in my head, building up a resentment, getting crazy and thinking, like F her or whatever, I just messaged her and I said, hey, I just wanted to check in with you. Is everything cool? Did I do anything to hurt you? And basically she just told me, no, it has nothing to do with you. I was uncomfortable because of blah, 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 and yada, 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 right? So the story was not written. I checked. I was specific. I didn't make any assumptions. I didn't make it about me, right? And really applying that to every area of my life so that I keep my relationships cool with people, It's just really important to do that. It says, and that means that you're going to have to let go of some of your pride, because typically the thing that gets in the way of us checking and be specific is our pride. We don't want to look bad. We don't want to look stupid. We don't want to whatever, right? And on a less deep level, let's say your boss tells you to do something, right? And you want to look like you know what you're doing, but you don't. It's okay to check and be specific and not assume. It's okay to ask questions, okay? It's better that you get the job done right than pretend like you got everything going on and you don't, right? It says, we shall tell you what we have done before going into a detailed discussion, and may be well to summarize the points as we see them. So, it says, how many times have people said to us, I can take it or leave it alone, why can't he or she? Why don't you drink like a gentleman or quit? That fellow can't handle his liquor. Why don't you try beer and wine? Lay off the hard stuff. His willpower must be weak. He could stop if he wanted to. She's such a sweet girl, I think he'd stop for her sake. The doctor told him that if he ever drank again, it would kill him. But here he is all lit up again. Now it says, these are commonplace observations on drinkers, which we hear all the time. So basically, all these things they're talking about are people who are looking at us like we're out of our minds and not really understanding what alcoholism is and not really understanding what addiction is and just thinking that we are weak-willed people, right? It says, back of them is a world of ignorance and misunderstanding. We can see that these expressions refer to people whose reactions are very different from ours. And now we're going to talk about the 3 different kinds of drinkers or users. Okay? So, we're going to write number 1 and underline moderate drinkers. So moderate drinkers have little trouble in giving up liquor entirely if they have good reason for it. They can take it or leave it alone. So a moderate drinker can take alcohol and drugs and leave it alone. We can control it. We can moderate. We can basically, it has no power over us, right? It's your weekend warrior people. It says then we have a certain type, and we're going to underline hard drinker and write number 2, hard drinker. It says he may have the habit badly enough to gradually impair him physically and mentally. It may cause him to die a few years before his time. If a sufficiently strong reason, ill health, falling in love, change of environment, or the warning of a doctor becomes operative, this man can also stop or moderate. Although he may find it difficult and troublesome, he may even need medical attention. So, hard drinker looks a lot like an alcoholic or an addict, right? They look like they get sick. They may have to see a doctor. They may ruin aspects of their relationship. They may not show up for people and, do stupid shit, right? But it says if someone comes to them, let's say, they get arrested for a DUI or, they have a birth of a child or their, partner threatens to leave them or whatever, any of these kind of things happen, then what they can do is they are able to stop or moderate. So there is that ability to control, right? Although they might find it difficult, they are able to do that, okay? So sometimes alcoholics look like, and drug addicts look like moderate or hard drinkers, and sometimes hard drinkers look like, and hard users look like drug addicts and alcoholics. So we need to find what the difference is. And here we are. It says, but what about the real alcoholic or the real drug addict? And we're going to underline and highlight this whole paragraph and write number 3 here. So, it says, he may start off as a moderate drinker. Okay? So that means that some drug addicts and alcoholics may start off gradual. Right? Some may start off slow. Some may take years before they're able to pinpoint and acknowledge the physical allergies. Some people can party and just look like it's fun and function and do all that stuff for a long time because they seem like they're managing it, and it takes 30 years for it to really get out of control to a place where they can see it themselves, right? It says, oh, and then there's also some people, like I knew a dude who didn't drink or use at all until he was 35, and he picked up a drink and a drug, and literally within a couple years he was that guy who was like, passed out in the gutter on, Santa Monica Boulevard in West Hollywood outside of Peanuts, just wondering what had happened to his life the night before. So for some people, the physical allergy hits really hard, and it's not a gradual experience, right? It says, an alcoholic may or may not become a continuous hard drinker. Okay, so what does that mean? So an alcoholic or an addict may or may not become a continuous hard drinker. Now, some drug addicts and alcoholics use all the time, right? They're just constantly getting high and drunk. I was that guy. I was always getting high. If I wasn't getting high, I was getting drunk, and vice versa. And that's the way that I lived for years, right? And one of the worst, so I used to work in treatment, one of the worst detoxes that I've ever seen in my life, ever, was from a guy who only drank for 2.5 to 3 weeks out of the entire year. Okay? So for like 11 months, this guy was bone sober all the time. And then for the last 3 weeks or whatever, he'd be a mess. But what he would do to himself in that small period of time was amazing. And I remember he was a guy that I needed to, we had to lay down diapers in his bed, like diaper pads, and we had to carry him to the shower, and he was like shitting himself and throwing up on himself and sweating and having, hallucinations and shaking, and we had to like sponge bathe him, and he was like a total mess. And I remember one of the funniest things was he finally came to, right? And he was able to sit in on one of our groups, and I sat across from him, and he was sitting in the group, and the first thing he said was, okay, well, I feel much better now. I think I'm ready to go. And this was literally like a day after he actually finally came out of his detox. So that was also, allowing me to see how insane we are and how our brain is working against us in sobriety. To think that, a guy in that condition who was literally on the edge of death thought that, as soon as he felt a little better, he was, ready to join the world, attack the world. So basically, we may or may not become a continuous hard drinker. So that's that experience. It says, but at some stage of his drinking career, he begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink, and that's that dude. And this is the physical allergy. So once we start to drink or use, that's where we lose control. Okay? That's really important. So for the 11 months that dude was not drinking or using, he was totally cool, but as soon as he started to drink, boom, it was done for him. It says, here is a fellow who has been puzzling you, especially in his lack of control. He does absurd and incredible and tragic things while drinking. So when we drink, we do absurd, incredible, and tragic things. It says he's the real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We're going to underline and highlight that. So that's basically alluding to the split personality of being able to function in the world, and then all of a sudden we take a drink or get high and we become this crazy antisocial weirdo, right? It says he is seldom mildly intoxicated when we drink. That's the important aspect. That's the sort of thing that's we need to understand as we're reading this. It's not talking about if you are an alcoholic or a drug addict, you're always high and drunk. That's not what they're saying. They're saying that when you do get high and drunk, you're seldomly mildly intoxicated. An alcoholic typically doesn't just have a sip of wine and then put it down consistently, right? Or just one little toke of weed and put it down consistently, right? Typically, when we get high or drunk, we get high or drunk. It says he's always more or less insanely drunk when we drink. Okay? His disposition while drinking resembles his normal nature, but little. He may be one of the finest fellows in the world, yet let him drink for a day, and he frequently becomes disgustingly and even dangerously antisocial when we drink, right? He has a positive genius for getting tight or drunk at exactly the wrong moment, particularly when some important decision must be made or engagement to be kept. So how many times did you have something important that you wanted to show up for, and basically you ruined it because you got drunk when you didn't want to get drunk, right? Or got high when you did not want to get high. He is often perfectly sensible and well-balanced concerning everything except for liquor. That was not me. It says, but in that respect, he's incredibly dishonest and selfish, and we're going to underline, but in that respect, he's incredibly dishonest and selfish, and we're going to highlight dishonest and selfish. Now, if we are drunk and we are high a lot, and we are dishonest and selfish a lot, what that means is that we practice dishonesty and selfishness, right? So if you practice something over and over and over and over and over again, it becomes part of your character. So that's why when we get sober, the dishonesty and the selfishness doesn't just disappear. That's why this program exists, so it gives us a way to practice honesty. It gives us a way to practice selflessness. And that's why taking other people through the book is so important, because that's really the only thing that you're going to be able to do to truly practice selflessness in the beginning, right? Okay. It says, he often possesses special abilities, skills, and aptitudes, and has a promising career ahead of him. He uses his gifts to build up a bright outlook for his family and himself, and then pulls the structure down on his head by a senseless series of sprees. Who can relate to that? Who had opportunities, who had talents, who had, gifts that they were given, and basically they just ruined all of them because, we got high and drunk, right? It says, he is the fellow who goes to bed so intoxicated he ought to sleep the clock round. Yet, early the next morning, he searches madly for the bottle he misplaced the night before. If he can afford it, he may have liquor or drugs concealed all over his house to be certain no one gets his entire supply away from him to throw down the waste pipe. I was that dude. I was the guy who was hiding bags of meth underneath the carpets and music boxes behind mirrors, somewhere in the television, wherever I could, because I just didn't want it to go away. It says, as matters grow worse, he begins to use a combination of high-powered sedative. I'm going to underline, high-powered sedative, and liquor to quiet his nerves so he can go to work. Then comes the day when he simply cannot make it and gets drunk all over again. Perhaps he goes to a doctor who gives him morphine, underline morphine, or some sedative, underline sedative, with which to taper off. Then he begins to appear at hospitals and sanitariums. It says, this is by no means a comprehensive picture of the true alcoholic. Underline true alcoholic. So the point of us underlining high-powered sedative, morphine sedative, is that they're saying that this is all aspects of the true alcoholic. So a true alcoholic uses drugs too. Okay, so we're reiterating the idea of singleness of purpose was not what it is today. Singleness of purpose was specifically designed to stay sober and help another alcoholic achieve sobriety, but it wasn't about not sharing about drugs if you're an alcoholic, right? So all those people who shame other people at meetings for, sharing about drugs, in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it talks about the true alcoholic being someone who gets involved with drugs, okay? It says, this is not a comprehensive picture of the true alcoholic as her behavior and patterns vary, but this description should identify him roughly. So the identification of a true alcoholic is someone who gets high. Okay, cool. I'm glad that's clear. It says, why does he behave like this? If hundreds of experiences have shown him that one drink means another debacle with all its attendant suffering, so debacle is another tragedy, attendant means associated with suffering and humiliation, why is it he takes that one drink? So why do we drink even though our consequences suck, right? It says, why can't he stand the water wagon? What has become of the common sense and willpower that he still sometimes displays with respect to other matters? So they're talking about the brain, the thinking, right? It says, perhaps there will never be a full answer to these questions, and we're going to underline that. Perhaps there will never be a full answer to these questions. I don't think that they still have an answer to these questions. They don't understand why our brains lie to us about drinking and using yet. That has not been figured out by the scientists. It says opinions vary considerably as to why the alcoholic reacts differently from normal people. We are not sure why once a certain point is reached, little can be done for him. It said we cannot answer the riddle. We're going to underline we cannot answer the riddle. Again, we still cannot answer that riddle. We know that while the alcoholic keeps away from drink, as he may do for months or years, he reacts much like other men. We are equally positive that once he takes any alcohol whatsoever into his system, something happens both in the bodily and mental sense, which makes it virtually impossible for him to stop. And we're going to underline and highlight that. We are equally positive that once he takes any alcohol whatsoever into his system, something happens both in the body and the mind, which makes us impossible for us to stop, right? So at the top of this page, you're going to write end of body. And then on the right side, you're going to write the mind begins. So we talked a lot about the physical allergy so far, and now we're going to start talking about the mind. It says the experience of any alcoholic will abundantly confirm this. So it says, these observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. So they're talking about the physical allergy. All these observations that they've talked about, the physical allergy, the phenomenon of craving, triggering the phenomenon of craving, wanting to stop but can't, all that stuff like that, none of that would even matter if we never picked up again once we put it down, right? So it says, therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than in his body. Now you're going to underline and highlight all this, and you're going to circle the word mind. And next to that, you're going to write sober mind, and that's really important. The reason why this is so important is that many people think that, okay, cool, I'm an alcoholic, I'm an addict, I'm going to stop using, I'm going to stop drinking, and my thinking is cool. I see it in treatment all the time. Kids are always like, okay, cool, I'm cool now, I can trust my thinking's so much clearer now, blah, blah, blah. But what they don't understand is that their sober mind is the one that gets them to pick up and use again, right? So it's the sober mind that cannot be trusted. Now, this is temporary, okay? This not being able to trust your thinking is temporary, and that's the thing that you don't hear in meetings very often, is that there is hope, and the book talks about sanity being returned. And we will get to that when we get to that. But the condition of sanity returning is you working the program. Okay? If you don't work the program, you are never going to get rid of the selfishness and self-centeredness. Now, when I talk about working the program, I'm talking about working with as many people as you possibly can. So how is that going to help you? Well, one, it's going to get rid of the selfishness and self-centeredness. But two, you're going to be brainwashing yourself with the message of recovery, right? So if I'm constantly reading this book with another drug addict or another alcoholic, I'm constantly reminding myself about my physical allergy. I'm constantly reminding myself about my brain and the little tricks that my brain might pull, right? And I'm also constantly reminding myself about the importance of the connection to a power greater than myself, working with others, and all this stuff. So that is making me more sane, right? So the sober mind is the problem. The sober mind without the recovery, because the recovery is what treats our mind. The recovery is found in the first 164 pages of the big book, as we talked about in the triangle. So the more that you are in the book, the more that you are treating your mind. So that means that if you are someone who's just working with your sponsor once a week and you're not even in the book, then your mind may or may not be getting help. Okay? If you're working in the book with your sponsor once a week, that's once a week that your mind is getting help. But if you're working with your sponsor, going through the book, and then you're dedicating your other days of the week before you meet with your sponsor again to taking as many people through those pages of the book as your sponsor took you through, then you are treating your mind every single day. Therefore, you are becoming more and more sane constantly. right? So it says, if you ask him why he started on the last bender, the chances are he will offer you any one of 100 alibis. Sometimes these excuses have a certain plausibility or believability. Sometimes our alibis have believability. My grandfather died. It makes sense to want to drink. My, wife left me. It makes sense that I want to drink. I lost this job. It makes sense that I want to drink. Or I got this great opportunity. Let's go and celebrate. Or, my friend's getting married. I'm going to toast, right? So all those things seem plausible. It says, but none of them really make sense in the light of the havoc an alcoholic's drinking bout creates. So, if I look at all the consequences that I had because of my drinking and using, the going to jails, losing relationships, losing material things, losing money, losing opportunities, all that stuff like that, losing self-respect, losing love for myself, if I look at whatever excuse I have for drinking in comparison to that stuff, of course it's not worth it. But unfortunately, when I'm trying to think about all those consequences, I can't. And that's where my brain is trying to mess with me. It says, they sound like the philosophy of the man who is having a headache, beats himself on the head with a hamper so that he can't feel the ache. If you draw this fallacious, now fallacious means lacking in logic, reasoning, to the attention of the alcoholic, he will laugh it off or become irritated and refuse to talk. Now that was me. Either I would slough it off and make a joke out of it, or I get pissed at you if you brought it up to me, right? It says, once in a while, he may tell the truth. And the truth, strange to say, is usually that he has no more idea why he took that first drink than you have. And we're going to underline and highlight that. So the real truth of it is that when it comes down to it, we have no idea why we're drinking. Now, this is one of the things that treatment centers get kind of messed up, because everyone's trying to find the causes and conditions of our drinking, okay? And they're trying to look at, the molestation when we were kids, or the abandonment, or the, parents who didn't treat us with love or just threw money at us, or whatever, like the stuff that happened to us when we were young, right? Now, none of that's really the reason why that we drink and use the way that we do. The reason why we drink and use alcoholically or as an addict is because we have a physical allergy, right? It has nothing to do with any of that other stuff, right? Now, we may use those things as excuses, and carry those things with us if we want, but they're not really the reason why we drink and use the way that we do. So to basically spend a month of early sobriety trying to get to those things is a real waste of time, right? We just need to be learning about, okay, the physical allergy, identifying that, and what are we going to do about it, okay? Once we're able to be clear enough to start getting into some practice of service and understanding what the book and the program is about, going to meetings, just getting some different behaviors under our belt, having a sponsor, calling a sponsor, blah, blah, blah. And then when the time is right and we can handle looking at our past and start looking at some of the causes and conditions of why we feel about ourselves, then then we can sort of address that stuff. So this is really here a message to the therapists, to the counselors out there, to the, sober technicians or whatever. Set your ego aside. I know you want to have that big win of opening someone up and, getting to their deepest, darkest secrets in their first 30 days, but is that really the responsible thing to do? Is that really what the drug addict or the alcoholic needs, or are you doing more damage to them? And that's just something that you need to ask yourself, right? Okay, so it says, some drinkers have excuses with which they are satisfied part of the time, but in their hearts they really do not know why they do it. Once this malady or illness has a real hold, they are a baffled lot. There is the obsession that somehow, someday, they will beat the game. So that is the mental obsession, right? The ability to believe a lie. The lie that we believe, basically, when it comes down to it, is that we do not have the physical allergy, or that we will be able to beat the game, or that we will be able to drink and use like a normal person. That's it. That is the mental obsession right there. It says, but they often suspect that they are down for the count. How true this is if you realize, in a vague way, their families and friends sense that these drinkers are abnormal, but everybody hopefully awaits the day when the sufferer will rouse himself from his lethargy and assert his power of will. So again, people around us typically are waiting for us to figure it out and get it together, and they just think it's our laziness or our willpower that's getting in the way. And what they don't understand is that our will or our thinking is what's working against us, because we're living a lie, basically. And once a lie takes hold, the physical allergy gets triggered, and then we're off on another spree, which can lead to homelessness, institutionalization, or death. So I'm going to stop there. I hope you enjoyed the session, and thank you for watching. Bye.